successful. And it's hard to sum up in 10 minutes what's going on in a country like India with 1 billion people with shared value. So you've got a tall order in front of you, but please introduce the Shared Value Initiative India, the work you're doing, and then we'll hear from Wilfred.
Thank you, Justin. If you really look at the Shared Value Initiative in India, it's actually driven by a very important aspect, that the social objectives and economic objectives are going to go hand in hand in the future. If you really have to solve the problem of 1.3 billion people who reside there, we have to fundamentally look at the business models. We have to fundamentally relook at the way capitalism is actually being talked about. So looking at this whole idea, we are really pushing forward with the Shared Value Initiative in India, wherein we would be looking at 3 or 4 distinct things. The most important one is going to be research and publication, trying to push the agenda forward. The second is going to be a congregation of sorts of people, wherein we are able to bring people together to discuss the practice of shared value. Of course, it's going to be a membership-driven body, but fundamentally the question is going to be, how do we really push the agenda forward in India? How do we really talk about models which go beyond CSR? And in fact, we already do something very interesting called the Porter Prize in Creating Shared Value. The question is going to be, how do we really take the next steps in terms of saying that there is a shared value enterprise, a certification that can actually be given to enterprises who imbibe this whole practice. And of course, the shared value index that we are really looking at working with the stock exchange in India to really, because we are fundamentally sure, or I'm convinced that when you look at the future, the enterprises who imbibe shared value as a construct are going to be actually beating the stock markets without a doubt. Because that's where you actually look at what we can fundamentally call as social objectives and economic objectives. So having said this, I would really like to move forward with Wilfred. So Wilfred, what do you think? What is going to be India's role in the global shared value context? Because India is going to be one of the hotbeds of experimentation in terms of the new capitalism.
I think if you look at India in general, what you see as a country that is unique. It is the largest democracy with huge discrepancies. Somebody made a comment that the US poor are the envy of the world. That statement clearly doesn't hold in India. It is a country that has had some phenomenal success also. If we look at post-independence, the country was able to stick together. We have 30+ nations in India that were molded into one cohesive political unit. If you compare that with the EU, we're still trying to convince the Brits that the Channel is de facto narrower than the North Atlantic, right? And if you ask the Germans, they think the Greeks are actually living on a different planet. Right? So I think what we have to see in India is both the challenge and also some very, very significant successes. That in itself will drive alternative solutions. There's one example is the Delivering Change Foundation. The Delivering Change Foundation runs the project management office for the Chief Minister of Maharashtra. This guy is Fadnavis. He is the blue-eyed boy of Prime Minister Modi. So he needs to prove that he's actually delivering change. What they do is they track initiatives in his office, and at the same time they leverage an NGO with 75,000 women in Maharashtra, 1 woman per poll booth. So they get bottom-up feedback on a live basis, telling the Prime Minister or the Chief Minister, listen, your water initiative is working, you have an issue with infrastructure implementation. And these are concepts that are now being exported as well. We have an application of this concept in Mexico, and there's a discussion with Merkel in Germany to see how does this kind of model actually make sense even in the environment of Germany or other European nations. So I think that's basically the opportunity in India. We can drive innovation, new business models, and new approaches to solving problems due to the pressures that the country faces.
So coming back to the Indian context, what do you think would be the idea of replicability and scalability of models? Because in India, you just cannot have one enterprise solve the problems. You have to really look at replicability and scalability as well.
Yeah, I think we discussed it already this morning. The key issue in India is profit, right? Profit is not something that is bad, but it's really an enabling factor to drive change in the country. A good example is HUL, Hindustan Unilever. They started with their Shakti Amma project as a CSR activity. So they basically said, we'll take some money, we'll give it to some ladies in the villages, they start selling our products, and we really don't care. If they sell, they don't sell, doesn't make a difference. That didn't work. They didn't get the talent to look at this channel, they didn't get the determination to drive it, so then they changed it into a shared value initiative and said, okay, fine, we will measure this with the same KPIs that we have for every other channel. We will enable those women via very cheap mobile phones and a particular application that allows us to order and track stock. And with that, the model basically scaled to about 170,000 women. These women make about $70 to $100 a month, which in a village means they are lower middle class. And these were women that had nothing before. And the profitability of that channel is as good as the normal profitability of any other channel. Driven by innovation, they're actually leveraging cross-selling opportunities to drive profitability of this channel. But I think that is a fundamental thing for India that's even recognized by Prime Minister Modi. Because the way he changed Gujarat is by actually not giving water and electricity for free to the farmers, but by charging them. With that money, he was able to reinvest in public utilities and ensure that water and electricity in the countryside are actually reliable. So profit motives matter. The second thing that matters is explaining the business case to people, to farmers. We had the discussion last week with Swachh Bharat. Open defecation is a major problem in India. We basically have open defecation to the tune of 60% vis-a-vis some 4% in Bangladesh. And what the Prime Minister's initiative finds out is that it's not just taking some money, putting up a toilet somewhere and saying, okay, fine, I've done my duty. You actually need to work with the local population to explain the business case of using toilets. They're willing to invest. You need to explain to them why they should have toilets, and one of the main explanations is clearly the fact that we have to avoid diarrhea. In India, we have about 7,000 deaths due to diarrhea every week. That means one Nepal every week. The third thing, and just if you allow me, is, and we talked about this before, clusters. We need to drive innovation clusters in India, and that is happening, starting to happen. We have a lot of sort of incubation that's happening in the IT space. Some is happening in the hardware space, and I think the social space is also very nascent, but slowly moving in that direction.
Quite interesting, Wilfred, but then you actually pointed out the role of the corporations. Yes, without a doubt, we have enterprises like Nestle, Unilever, Vatsalya, and so on and so forth, who have really created impact on the ground. But there is this 2% CSR law. The question is that 2% versus the 98%. How do you really look at this aspect in terms of India, and how do you really look at creating positive impact? How do you really push people to go for that 98%?
I think the 2% law is a well-intended law. What we see is for leading companies like Nestle and others, this is really not their main concern. They understand shared value, they know how to drive impact in those various countries. What we need to make sure is that we have a broader application of shared value concepts across various companies. That's where the 2% potentially can have an impact. Unfortunately, shared value initiatives or social ventures that make profit are not covered under the 2%, and that leads us back to CSR. And CSR, in my opinion, is inherently not scalable. So I think it's a good idea, but for many companies, I think this will just turn out to be another tax. So the application, the execution of that idea is something that we need to look at carefully and drive in a different direction.
Very interesting. And coming to the platform now, how do you think that the platform that we are really pushing forward today and launching today, the Shared Value Initiative in India, could actually have a larger societal impact? How could it actually drive competitiveness of the nation at large?
I think it's important again to see that India has a Bollywood culture. I mean, for those who don't know Bollywood, it's much larger than Hollywood. And we have more, we have Tollywood, which is larger than Bollywood. So I think what we like is basically we have these leading heroes, and what we need is an army. right? So we have these great companies, Nestle and others, that are doing a fantastic job in driving shared value, having an impact in the country. But what we need is a standardization across companies. If you look at the housing sector, Tata Housing, Loda, Shoba, all these have training schools for masons. But we don't have an India national sort of training degree for a mason. So we need to coordinate efforts. That's where a platform has a role to play. We need to leverage best practices from the leaders and make them applicable to companies that are laggards, that don't know what to do and how to drive change. We also need to actively move what is actually something that's very common in India. CSR is common. If you look at Tata, a lot of the brand name is linked to the fact that they're reinvesting a certain proportion of profits into the communities where they work. The same is true for Kirloskar, for Thermax, for Forbes Marshall. There's lots of social work that's been going on typically around the sites of these organizations, but that's localized. So now how can we, again, create scalable models that have a nationwide impact? I think that's where a platform can make a significant difference.
Very interesting, and quick 30-second answer to when you talk about these two interesting things that we are talking about, shared value index and shared value enterprise certification. Well, what would you think about it? 30-second response, please.
No, again, you have two components. One is pull, one is push, right? The pull component basically needs to influence the minds of corporates and, even more importantly, the minds of customers and employees, right? So in India, that's typically a given. People want to create value for their country. They want to be part of India's story going forward. They want to help people that are in difficult straits. So sort of a certification and price can definitely create a positive momentum where basically you have to be certified to attract talent or be attractive for employees. The second thing in India is also basically the push component. The push component, meaning government needs to play a more active role in enforcing certain regulations. I think there's basically still a gray zone where you can pay to get out of certain obligations, and that needs to be addressed and needs to be fixed.
Thank you, Wilfred. Thanks a lot. So over to you, Justin.
Great. Thank you. Thanks for those contributions.